Despite a lot of overlap, there is a distinction between a trend and a fixture. And a fixture can be virtually anything, as can a trend. There can be cultural trends, there can be technological trends, and likewise there can be cultural and technological fixtures. My own view, and of course it's completely subjective, is that the distinction between trend and fixture is such that a fixture is something that has been around for at least several decades. So, for example, I would say that in 2020, the automobile is a fixture of modern life, of modern technological life, as would be the airplane. They've been around for quite some time. But if you were to refer to the 1920s, I'd be much less inclined to call them fixtures and more trends, if only because of their relative youth with respects to their emergence. But I'm not here to necessarily talk about technology. As almost everybody the world over knows, we're currently in a type of crisis. The crisis itself is biotic in nature and has caused untold havoc, in our lifetime hitherto unknown havoc, in the world, socially, economically, etc. But there are new variables in place that this new havoc-creating phenomenon is affecting that were not in place even 10 years ago. And so what I want to take the time to do in this video is address this notion that the mating market has in fact changed, and I want to address the idea that specifically some people might be inclined to believe that this is going to be a fixture as opposed to a trend. Of course, here I'm talking about things like Tinder, online dating apps, etc., etc. And anecdotally, at least, there's a lot of evidence surfacing from many men I've talked to, as well as listening to conversations and reading comments and many parts of the internet, that the traffic that these men typically would get on applications such as Tinder and similar ones is much, much better than it typically would be, which is to say they're getting matched with more attractive females or what have you. Some men I've listened to, not all men, have gone so far as to suggest that the current crisis is going to completely change or shift the mating market. And the basis for this claim is pretty simple. The idea that women crave security is nothing new, and it's very well attested, as all of you would know, and that the current crisis creates a sense of insecurity in all people, and in particular in women. And of course, then as a consequence of this, women would gravitate towards more resource-heavy men as opposed to what has been the current trend, notice I use the word trend, of just going off of looks, going off of raw attraction. Now, that might kind of be true, but what are we actually seeing in terms of these many anecdotes that are arising in the current crisis? Yes, men are, at least in terms of matching and online interaction, receiving more attention. They're interacting much more frequently with quote-unquote hotties, women that would normally be out of their league, inaccessible, or women who would otherwise never talk to them. But why is this? Well, it's pretty simple. There is, depending on the country, a relative lockdown of your ability to go out, socialize, and do all of the things that women typically like to do. You'll note there are many Twitter posts by now of women complaining about their situation, and even sometimes a somewhat dumbfounded revelation that after having been cooped in for such a long time, some women realize that all they really do is spend money and go out and socialize and gab. Neither here nor there, but women have these needs, of course, and it's better to interact with someone than no one. And there's another element here. It's not as if Chads have ceased being interested in these women. The types of men that women normally would copulate with, they're still out there, and presumably they're still engaging in copulation. But let's be honest, much of the attention, anecdotal though it is, that some of these men are receiving from women who would normally be outside their so-called league is just a means to pass the time. It's not entirely dissimilar to the idea of some men simping for various Twitch employees who are vaginally endowed. It's a way of getting attention, passing the time, in a time, admittedly, for many, of great tedium and boredom. Mind you, that's not true for everyone, and it's certainly not true for most men, arguably. But for a lot of women, it's a difficult time not being able to go out and socialize. So I want to talk about the fact that this should not be read as a fixture. This is not a new fixture. This is a trend. I will talk at a later date in a separate video about the details of what I think about this crisis and various implications beyond the scope of this video. But needless to say, this too shall pass. It does give us some very good insight into things that have been said for many, many years by me and other people in the manosphere, that women are hyper-responsive to the environment they exist in. Which is to say, if you turn their conventional environment topsy-turvy, they're going to employ different strategies. But again, this is not really a mating strategy, now is it? They're just using men to get attention. Yes, here and there's some article claiming that a woman will simply offer herself up to all comers. I seriously doubt that. And rest assured, many booty calls are still being made. But they're not typically being made with these guys. It's just a matter of expanding the market. You see, the idea, I suspect, from people who run Tinder and similar applications would be you need to keep the engagement going. And admittedly, there's probably some reduction in engagement due to you-know-what. And so as a consequence of this, they will artificially expand the normal matching criteria to allow people who otherwise would never match to then match in an effort to simply make use of the app itself and to keep business going as usual. And on that point, this idea that women would be more partial towards provisioning, that is sort of true. And it doesn't take much reflection to realize that's always the calculus that women have always engaged with. The idea being that whereas men only really need to focus on looks for obvious reasons, women need to focus on both looks and provisioning. And in the hitherto hyper-real, hypergamous society we live in, they tend to focus more on looks because they can get away with it. They don't need provisioning. They don't need security. If there's a shift in the wind, significant enough, they will, of course, modify their mating strategy. But I want to point out very clearly here that this is not a fixture. This is neither a technological fixture nor a cultural fixture. Unless plagues and pandemics become the mainstay of society, and they may very well become such a thing, who knows, none of us is a prophet, then I suspect that most of the behavior will return back to normal, one way or another. So this is a trend, this uptick in attention seeking, an uptick in engagement and interaction. And more importantly, none of the stories I've heard have yielded concrete results in the form of a booty call or actual copulation. These are women seeking attention, and the men are willing to give it to them in the same sense that some guy drops $10 or $20 to some female employee on Twitch for showing her jugosauri on occasion. This is nothing new. It's the same old, just wrapped up in different wrapping paper. It's not to say, again, if there were some cataclysmic shift of everything moving in one direction, that women would not in turn change their interest. They would recalibrate what they normally go for. Historically, that was always the calculus. In former times of less security, of greater danger, women at times would forfeit their choice in aesthetics and looks and go for a guy who was a better provider. And that could happen again, but it seems very, very unlikely. Indeed, the trend, even though it's not a fixture of recent years, has been so heavy-handed and massive that it would really, really take a complete turnaround to move away from that. So I think it's way too early, given the fact there have been no concrete results to my knowledge, to document or claim that this actually represents some new juncture in time and we're moving into new territory with regards to the mating market. I think it will be business as usual. I think, for example, we're already seeing massive pickups in erotic e-commerce, so to speak. So yeah, there are a couple of new trends, but none of these trends really bode well for men. It's not like the institution of marriage is going to be fixed. In fact, I'll have more to say about that in a separate video. And it's not like the dynamics of the current mating market will dramatically change. Life is not going to get any easier for men in this respect, or in any other respect for that matter. We are definitely in for hard times any way you look at it and any way you cut it. Which is not to say that I'm against the idea that this could represent a major shift, this current crisis, but I think a lot more would have to happen to substantiate that claim with actual evidence. But who knows, maybe great changes are heralded even as I speak. I simply don't know, and I am open to the idea, but we'll ultimately see what happens. Anyway, gentlemen, take care, stay safe, and as always, may the gods watch over you, and if I'm still alive, I'll catch you later. Until then. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.